I'm a 15-year-old girl who recently experienced something quite hurtful surrounding my parents' wedding in Hawaii. My parents, who have been together for 20 years, decided to tie the knot. The proposal happened on their anniversary, a date that's always been special since it's also when my mom discovered she was pregnant with my eldest sister. The whole family was thrilled about the wedding announcement. As plans unfolded, it was evident the wedding would be an intimate affair with close family and friends. My sister, 25, was chosen as the maid of honor and my brother, 20, as the groomsman. Their roles made sense given their close bonds with our parents, my sister with our mom and my brother with our dad. As for me, I've always felt somewhat on the periphery of the family dynamics, often feeling like an outsider. Despite this, I wasn't too bothered initially about not having a defined role in the wedding. There was brief talk of me being the flower girl, but that quickly shifted to my niece, and other suggestions like reading a poem were dismissed by my parents who wanted to keep the event simple. However, as the wedding planning progressed, I felt increasingly excluded. My family didn't involve me in activities like dress shopping or venue discussions. I hoped they might eventually include me, but an invitation never came. Then, just a day before we were supposed to leave for Hawaii, my mom offhandedly asked if I was packed for the trip. I hadn't prepared at all, simply because no one had actually confirmed my attendance or discussed travel details with me. This oversight led to a misunderstanding, and in the confusion, it came out that they had forgotten to get me a ticket. Compounding the hurt, my family mistakenly told others I wouldn't attend because I had COVID-19. To clear up these false claims, I posted my negative COVID test online and openly corrected their narrative. This situation really highlighted my feelings of isolation within my family, a dynamic where I often feel overlooked and less valued. It was a painful realization, especially during what was supposed to be a joyful family occasion. I once inquired if I even had a ticket for the upcoming family event, and her reaction was telling. Her face went pale, confirming they had indeed forgotten to include me. Despite being the only one in my family with an unstable income, earning as a part-time children helpful, my parents had managed to arrange first-class tickets for my siblings and some friends for the wedding. But I was overlooked. When I brought it up, my mom dismissed it, suggesting they could simply snag a cheap, last-minute ticket from a budget airline. I then questioned the point of even having a dress for the ceremony, given that I had been excluded from the shopping trips that included my sister and other guests. My father's response was for me to just deal with it, implying that my less feminine demeanor meant it shouldn't bother me. His words stung because, despite not being overly girly, being part of these moments mattered to me. It hurt to be sidelined in the preparations for such a crucial family event. This escalated into a full-blown argument where I was labeled entitled and accused of trying to make myself invisible so they'd overlook me. An absurd notion. They ended up suggesting I might as well miss the event entirely if I continued to protest, to which I responded with a defiant agreement and retreated to my room. The next morning, they left for Hawaii without me. The wedding was small, yet they flooded social media with pictures, praising the magical week. People noticed my absence and questioned my parents, who lied, claiming I had to stay behind due to COVID. Frustrated, I took a COVID test, posted the negative result online, and clarified I was not sick, just forgotten. I tagged all the guests and those who had asked about my absence, openly sharing how I was excluded until the very last moment and ultimately uninvited. The backlash was immediate. My post overshadowed the wedding celebrations. At first, I felt justified in standing up for myself, but the harsh criticism from my family upon their return made me doubt my actions. They condemned my behavior as immature and spoiled. This response, combined with the ongoing tension at home, left me feeling miserable and questioning if there might have been a better way to handle everything. Now, still living under their roof as a minor, I'm left feeling trapped and deeply unsettled by the whole ordeal. I find myself grappling with feelings of guilt over the strained relationships within my family, wondering if I could have done more to bridge the gaps. Regrettably, I even feel responsible for ruining my parents' wedding, an event they neglected to include me in. I've engaged with some commenters online, one of whom suggested moving in with my grandmother after noticing my family's repeated dismissive behavior toward me. This isn't a new pattern. They've consistently overlooked me, making me feel like an outsider. Legally, I know that at 15, no court would force me to stay in a home where I'm not wanted, as long as I have another place to go. I'm seriously considering gathering my essentials and starting anew. One commenter asked if I could possibly move in with my grandmother. Ideally, I would, but I'm about to start college classes soon. I've managed to negotiate a delayed start, but the challenge remains since my school is local and my grandmother lives out of state. Moving there would mean dropping out of college, which isn't feasible. I don't have much family support here, just friends, and I hesitate to impose on anyone. Another commenter inquired about dormitory options at my college. Unfortunately, I don't qualify for financial aid, and dorm costs are beyond my budget. A friend is renting a studio near campus, which she finds more economical. The original plan was for me to live at home during my studies, but now that's uncertain. My grandmother couldn't attend the wedding due to her health and mobility issues. She's always been supportive and has often pointed out my parents' favoritism. We communicate mostly through text since she lives in a different state. Although she's unaware of the full extent of what happened at the wedding, she reached out after seeing my post on Facebook. I haven't told her everything. I don't want to worry her. The absence of my extended family at the wedding wasn't surprising. My grandmother struggles with travel, and my uncles, who live nearby her, weren't invited. It was just my siblings, their partners, and a few of their friends, about 10 people in total. Another commenter reflected on the intentionality behind my family's actions, wondering about their motives for excluding me. It's difficult to say, but their close-knit nature and shared interests, which starkly contrast with my introverted preferences for quieter activities, seem to be factors. I've always felt different from my outgoing parents and siblings, who thrive in social settings and frequently host gatherings, which I tend to avoid. Growing up, I was incredibly shy, often retreating to my bedroom or the basement to escape social interactions. As I matured, I gradually began participating more in social gatherings, although it seemed my parents barely noticed my efforts to engage. Their apparent indifference left me searching for explanations and feeling somewhat dismissed. Recently, I reached out for support through a blog post, not expecting much, but the response was heartwarming. The surge of comments and messages filled with advice and shared experiences was overwhelming. This community support played a crucial role in helping me navigate my emotions during a challenging time. A few days ago, I was struggling with guilt and depression, exacerbated by harsh remarks from my family. However, the kindness from strangers online helped stabilize my spirits. Their words reminded me that I was not at fault, and it was comforting to feel understood and supported. Amidst this turmoil, I decided to confide in my grandmother. Although she lives far away and faces her own challenges, including recovering from a minor stroke, she's always shown me love and stood up for me against my parents' favoritism. During our phone call, I explained everything, including how my parents had not included me in a family wedding trip. She was incredibly supportive, affirming that their oversight was intentional rather than accidental. Her words brought me to tears, but they also brought comfort and clarity. Our conversation was a turning point. She reassured me of her unwavering support and encouraged me to start planning for my future, promising to help however she could. This guidance was invaluable, and after our 2-hour talk, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was ready to begin making decisions for the upcoming school year, inspired by her love and the support of my online community. I have a friend who will soon be moving to Lace's studio, near our future campus. She has always been close to her parents, but also has 5 younger siblings, and she feels it's time for her to become more independent. Because of this, she has decided to move out. When I mentioned that I was looking for a place to stay, she kindly offered to let me live with her temporarily. I promised to contribute to the rent once I secured a job. She graciously insisted that I need not worry about the rent until I am more financially stable. We shared a heartfelt moment when I confided in her about a recent family ordeal related to my parents' wedding. This conversation happened just a few days ago. Following this, my brother sent me a lukewarm apology via text, admitting he hadn't realized I felt left out of a family trip and assumed I wouldn't enjoy it. Meanwhile, My sister accused me of airing personal issues publicly to gain sympathy, claiming that the rest of the family was blameless. Relations with my parents have been strained since they returned from their trip. Initially, they were quite upset with me, but after my grandmother's call, they suggested we all move past the incident. However, they implied it was my responsibility to stop talking about it, which led me to ask them to leave my room. I later called my grandmother to her, and she shared that she and my uncle had bought plane tickets to come and see me. While I'm touched by their support, I'm also concerned for my grandmother's health, given the challenges of travel. I tried to reassure her that we could manage without her visit, but she was adamant about coming to mediate. It's worrying, yet I can't help but look forward to a hug from her, even though I wish she wasn't putting herself through such stress. They are due to arrive tomorrow, and they haven't told my parents about their visit yet, at my grandmother's request. I'm anxious about her involvement, as much as I appreciate her efforts. I'm also preparing to tell my parents about my decision to move out and possibly cease contact, hoping my grandmother can help ease the conversation. Despite my worries about the burden on her, her love and determination mean the world to me. I've received numerous messages and comments, and I regret not being able to respond until now. I deeply appreciate everyone's support and kindness during this challenging time in my life. The overwhelming response has opened my eyes to how many others have faced similar experiences of neglect and abuse. I'm truly grateful to each of you for reaching out with comforting words to a stranger online. Recently, my grandmother called to inform me that she was coming to visit and support me. I was anxious about her visit because traveling is quite strenuous for her, and I felt responsible for the stress it would cause her. She arrived early Monday morning, accompanied by my uncle. I went to the airport to meet them, and the moment I saw her, I couldn't help but run into her arms, overwhelmed with emotion. At that moment, I couldn't articulate my feelings. I was crying too hard. I wanted to express my gratitude for her support, apologize for the inconvenience of her journey, and share my uncertainties about feeling unloved by my parents compared to the unequivocal love she has always shown me. When we met, the rush of emotions, guilt, anxiety, gratitude, all hit me simultaneously. But she embraced me tightly, assuring me that everything would be okay, with my uncle joining in to support us. After some time, we took a cab to their hotel. Despite her teary eyes and heavy breathing which worried me, my grandmother kept a comforting smile. She had booked a double room, so I could stay with her. Once settled, I shared everything with them. The years of emotional neglect and abuse I had endured, the toll it had taken on my well-being, and my plans to move out for the sake of my mental health, even if it meant sacrificing my schoolwork. I also mentioned my fears for the future and my recent suspicion, fueled by discussions online, that I might be the product of an affair, which had started to make sense to me. It was a heavy conversation, and I could see the impact it had on them, but they continued to provide comfort and reassurance. My grandmother, in particular, made it clear that she would always be there for me, affirming that I no longer needed to worry about my situation at home. Her reassurance was a tremendous relief, and it gave me the courage to begin planning a move to a friend's place and to start looking for a job to support myself. Thank you all once again for your kindness and for sharing your stories with me. Your support has been a beacon of hope and has significantly lightened my emotional load. I was always certain I wasn't a mistake. Both of my parents were ecstatic when they learned of my mother's pregnancy. They had made it clear that infidelity was an unforgivable betrayal in their marriage. However, as I grew up, I sensed a shift in their attitudes. Around the age of 3 or 4, I began to notice my parents' frustration with having a young child at home. They could easily involve my older siblings in their activities, but I was often left behind due to my shyness and tendency to cry easily, traits that made me quite different from my siblings. Despite their evident frustration, my parents were financially well off and had ensured that my education would be well funded. This financial security made the possibility of them withholding my college funds a distant concern until recent doubts surfaced. However, my aunt reassured me, promising to support my education and living expenses if necessary. She was adamant about not letting financial worries force me to drop out of college. Through all of this, I realized how privileged I had been financially. Growing up, I was showered with comforts: private schooling, a generous monthly allowance, a car, and no objections to my expenditures. This realization hit me hard when I compared my life to the more challenging circumstances others faced. I understood then how dependent I had been on my parents and how vulnerable that made me. I resolved to seek independence, not just financially, but in all aspects of life. Inspired by this newfound determination, I decided to accept my aunt's temporary support, but also committed to finding a job and forging my own path. After a tiring morning, we rested in a hotel before heading to my parents' house with my grandma and uncle in tow. Their presence was a shock to my parents. While they engaged in a heated conversation downstairs, I packed my essentials. The atmosphere was tense. My father was visibly upset, and my mother was tearful. When I descended with my belongings, ready to leave, my mother reached out to me, tearfully apologizing. But it was too late for apologies. I had made up my mind to start anew, driven by a desire for independence and a fresh start away from the turmoil of my childhood home. Responding in a chilled-out voice, I let my dad know that I didn't appreciate being treated harshly, prompting my uncle and grandma to intervene, telling him to ease up. At that point, I exited and waited outside for a cab to the hotel. There, my grandma comforted me, promising that I wouldn't have to return home. She explained that my college funding was secure and revealed that my parents had planned a lavish birthday celebration and a new car as peace offerings for the recent family drama. However, my grandma dismissed these gestures as mere attempts by my parents to maintain their social image. She was aware that these overtures were hastily concocted and wouldn't compensate for the years of neglect and exclusion from family gatherings. When my mom broke down after hearing that I had doubted my paternity, my grandma wasn't surprised. She pledged to handle my tuition payments if I chose to sever financial ties with my parents, which I did. I felt guilty, aware it wasn't my grandma's duty to support me, but I couldn't bear any more ties to my parents. Although not as affluent as my parents, my grandma reassured me she could manage, mentioning that the financial support she provided would be deducted from my mother's inheritance. The next day, accompanied by my friend and her parents, we inspected a studio apartment I was considering. It was smaller and more rundown than I had expected, complete with water damage, mold, and rusty appliances. Initially, I thought I could cope, but the adults pointed out the unsafe neighborhood and visible bullet holes in the building, changing our minds. We decided to hunt for a safer, two-bedroom apartment instead. My friend and I would contribute what we had initially budgeted for the studio, and our families would help with the extra costs. Despite striving for independence, I recognized this support as a necessity rather than a luxury, especially after the first-hand reality check at the studio. I was incredibly relieved when my friend's parents, who knew a bit about the difficulties I was facing, generously offered their home as a temporary refuge until I could find a suitable apartment. This came just in time, as my grandmother, who had been staying with me at a hotel, was due to return home in a few days. It was touching to learn that my friend, her parents, and my grandmother had coordinated this plan behind the scenes to ensure I had a safe place to transition to. I was deeply moved and thankful for their support, which brought tears to my eyes. In the meantime, I began moving my belongings from my parents' house and started to make space for myself at my friend's place. Each visit back home was tough. My mom would break down, repeatedly apologizing, and even my dad expressed his regrets. However, I kept my distance, feeling detached and unresponsive to their gestures. The situation with my siblings was complicated. My sister accused me of being harsh, but I ended the call abruptly and blocked her before she could continue. My brother, on the other hand, sent a long, apologetic message, acknowledging his ignorance of our parents' unfair treatment towards me. He expressed regret for his past assumptions and for allowing our parents to marginalize me over the years. I responded to him briefly, appreciating his words, but explaining that I needed space and wasn't ready to forgive yet. While I sensed his sincerity and noted that he hadn't been deliberately cruel like my sister, I still felt it necessary to maintain some distance for the time being. Despite the tension, I've decided not to sever ties completely with my brother as long as he respects my need for space. Keeping some connection, albeit minimal, seems prudent while the emotional wounds are still raw. Perhaps in the future, his actions will either confirm his changed attitude or reveal motives as unkind as the others. Amidst these family dynamics, I took a proactive step towards healing by scheduling an appointment with a therapist who specializes in counseling neglected teens. My first session, funded by my grandmother, is set for next week. Her support not only facilitated this important step, but also intensified my resolve to find a new, independent living situation where I can start afresh and build a more positive future. I'm currently looking for a job to ease the burden on my grandmother, who insists she's happy to help me, despite my repeated concerns. I start my classes or move into my apartment, but for now, I'm focusing on enjoying time with my grandmother and uncle and working on overcoming the guilt and depression that have troubled me for a long time. I want to express my deepest gratitude to this community for your kindness and support, and to those who shared their personal stories of facing similar challenges at a young age. Your stories have made me feel less alone and hopeful that things can improve if I put in the effort. I'm fortunate to have such an incredible support network of family and friends, and reaching out for help has been the best decision I've made. Opening up about my feelings to my loved ones and to you, my online friends, has been incredibly healing, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. As for my parents, the situation remains complicated. Whenever I've returned home to collect my belongings, my mother has been visibly upset, repeatedly apologizing, although we haven't discussed the details. My father has been more reserved, mostly silent, offering apologies that seem vague. I'm not sure if they are still processing everything that has happened, or if they don't believe they've done anything wrong. It's all a bit overwhelming, and I haven't had the chance to fully process it myself. In terms of financing my education, there has been concern about whether my parents will contribute. My grandmother has made it clear that not attending college is not an option, regardless of my parents' financial support. She has firmly refused to let me take out student loans, offering to cover the costs herself if necessary. I'm determined not to let financial concerns affect my education, thanks to the support I have. I've decided to have my grandmother handle the expenses, as I prefer not to involve my parents. Knowing their tendencies, they might hold this over my head for a lifetime, as if I owe them something. I'm incredibly grateful that my grandma is willing and able to support me in this way. Sometimes I feel unworthy of her generosity. A commenter once mentioned to me not to feel guilty for being born into a well-off family. They pointed out that I seem more self-aware than many others from similar backgrounds. They advised that working and achieving independence from my family's wealth would be truly enriching and would open up many aspects of the world to me. They reassured me that being privileged doesn't automatically make me spoiled, and that striving to earn what I need can build character and teach valuable lessons, like how to deal with challenging people and situations, understand the value of time and money, learn about teamwork, and navigate societal structures. I'm thankful for having a safety net like my grandma. The commenter also encouraged me not to pay attention to anyone who might look down on me for this advantage. They emphasized that many people struggle to make ends meet, and they wouldn't wish that hardship on anyone just starting out. Recently, I've been reflecting on my background and the privileges I've taken for granted. After a significant disagreement with my parents about finances, a concept I rarely had to consider seriously, I turned to online communities for support. Reading about the struggles of others who faced financial difficulties from a young age or due to family conflicts has opened my eyes to my own disconnectedness from reality. I feel a mix of guilt and anger. Guilt for my naivety and anger on behalf of those who haven't had the same advantages. I'm learning to appreciate the support I receive and the comforts I've been afforded. Looking ahead, I aim to achieve independence and maintain an acute awareness of the hardships faced by those who grew up without the privileges of a spacious home, private schooling, and other benefits I had growing up.